فكرك واختيارك دعهما وراك، والتدبير أيضا واشهد من براك. مولاك المهيمن إنه يراك، فوض له أمورك واحسن في الظنون. لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون، لو ولم وكيف قول ذي الحماق يعترض على الله الذي خلق، وقضى وقدر كل شيء بحق. يا قلبي تنبه واترك المجون، لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون. قض من تعالى بالرزق القوام، في الكتاب المنزل نورا للأنام. فالرضا فريضة والسخط حرام، والقنوع راحة والطمع جنون. لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون. أنت والخلائق كلهم عبيد، والإله فينا يفعل ما يريد. همك واغتمامك ويحك ما يفيد، القضاء تقدم فاغنم السكون. لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون. الذي لغيرك لا يصل إليك، والذي قسم لك حاصل لديك. فاشتغل بربك والذي عليك، في فرض الحقيقة والشرع المصون. لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون. شرع المصطفى الهادي البشير، ختم الأنبياء البدر المنير. صلى الله عليه الرب القدير، ما ريح الصبا مالت بالغصون. لا يكثر همك ما قدر يكون. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم، أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم، عند خير العرب والعجم. فاستلم شباك حجرته، واستقم في قدس حضرته، واستلم في ظل سدرته، سدرة الإحسان والكرم. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم. قف أمام القبر بالأدب، ماثلا في أشرف الرتب، في مكان القلب والقرب والرضا والجود والنعم. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم. ثم قل يا أشرف الرسل، يا حبيب الله في الأزل. ثم قل يا أشرف الرسل، يا حبيب الله في الأزل، يا عظيم العلم والعمل، يا سميع اللوح والقلم. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم. يا رسول الله حبك في مهجتي كالدر في الصدف، والشذي في الروضة الألف، والفرات العذب في التين. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم. أيها المشتاق لا تنمي، هذه أنوار ذي سلم. عن قليل أنت بالحرم، عند خير العرب والعجم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله، عدد ما في علم الله، صلاة وسلام دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So these weekends tend to go very fast, as always, and here we are in the final session. We still have a cozy session, of course, but the final official session, session number 7, which is titled "That Miscellaneous Topics Related to the Halal and Haram." And as you will see, is that we get deeper and deeper into this material. This is a very technical book, It is a very detailed book, and as we began on Friday night, it's actually one of the longest books of the Ihya al-Madin in terms of the pages and the copy. They have it over 200 pages. The fourth largest book amongst the 40. And it really requires that reading this book in detail with a scholar. There'll be many terms. This is one of the books that if you read on your own, you're going to have a little bit of difficulty in several sections. It really requires a teacher. Many of the other chapters of the books of the Ihya, a good deal of what's in that book can be read on one's own. Nevertheless, that we've tried to convey the gist of it. And as we get into, there's one aspect of it is just talking about the knowledge component. And then the next aspect, as always, the second aspect, as always, and we've said this the past several retreats, is the application. And the benefit of just hearing the knowledge component is then you'll be provoked to ask about the matters of your religion post-retreat. It is impossible for us to cover that every single matter that is halal and haram and that is of a doubtful nature in a day and a half or a day and 3/4. That's just not possible. But what we can do is talk about the gist of what's in here, and hopefully that in a thought-provoking way that set up a path for people that continue to tread post-retreat, where we can continue to learn our religion in greater and greater detail and in more and more depth. And so that we have a little bit of business to cover here and some of these miscellaneous issues, and that Imam al-Ghazali includes as a part of this book on the Ihya. And this is going to be a little bit technical like last session, and so bear with me, and that almost surely going to be questions that someone has in relation to some of these topics. So what he includes as chapter 3, he titles it Fil Bahth was Su'al, on scrutiny and inquiry, that wal hujum wal ihmal wal madhannuhuma. So on scrutiny and inquiry, or silence and disregard, and their indicators. And so there's going to be a little bit of reading that we'll do here, so we're not going to translate to Arabic and only point to the words that we need to. So he says, know that you are not at liberty to question those who present you with food or a donation, or from whom you would like to purchase something, or from who you would like to accept a gift. Nor may you say to such a person, I am not sure that this I'm not sure that this is something that is lawful. Therefore, I must not take it before I have examined it. Likewise, you may not omit scrutiny and simply take everything without first making certain whether it is lawful or unlawful. So he's saying on one hand that you can't just accept everything, nor can you just reject everything. So you can't just be that cautious in a misguided fashion, in a misplaced fashion, nor can you be that neglectful. He says, rather, it is sometimes essential that you question, and sometimes it is prohibited. It is sometimes recommended that you question, and sometimes it is disapproved. So we start to realize a lot of nuance in these matters. And it is because of this nuance we have so much confusion. This nuance creates this confusion, not in a negative way, but this is why people are confused. And they're confused because they lack the nuance in terms of understanding the knowledge component, or they lack the ability to understand their particular circumstance in light of the knowledge component, and thus confusion arises, and that leads to people's questions. So essentially what we need is a balanced approach. And so he then goes on to say, the matter then is in need of detailed explanation, of course. The unequivocal teaching on the matter comes down to this: questioning is required when doubt occurs. So So that's the main thing he wants us to know here. Questioning is required when doubt occurs. Okay, that mawaqi' al-riba. Moreover, reason for doubt may arise either in regard to wealth or its possessor. So then he starts to go into a detailed explanation of the first reason of the two, the circumstances of the possessor. Okay, and now this is whether we're going to someone's house for lunch. This depends upon what questions we ask when we get to the house, or if they give us something or anything of that nature. It's not related to the wealth itself, it's related to the possessor of that wealth. And so, as is the case, is that there's always going to be detailed breakdowns. So what does he say? The circumstances of a possessor, yani a possessor of some wealth, may be of one of three kinds, and this is in relation to our own selves. Unknown, majhul, ambiguous, mashkuk, or known, ma'lum. So there's different types of people. At least to the extent that is made possible by evidence. So just hang on to your questions and write them down. He will solve them in the way that he kind of ends this. The first kind of circumstance is the unknown. So the unknown is a person concerning whom there is no visible sign of corruption or injustice. Okay? There's no qarina, there's no visible sign of fasad, that them being legally corrupt and not practicing their deen properly, or dhulm, or injustice. And then he gives some examples from his particular context. And so in our context, that's going to look very different. But surely there are people that you see. Now, there's one thing very important here, is that when we talk about husn al-dhan, is that husn al-dhan really is about people's intentions. Okay? That in terms of our mu'amalat, our dealings, is that the basis is actually the opposite. It's actually based upon su'al dhan. Now, what does that mean? That does not mean that we walk around saying that, oh, this person's this person's that. No. But it means that if I pull into a parking lot, it's not a wise thing to have a good opinion of someone when I have money in the car and leave my wallet in the car. Oh, these are all good people around me, so I'm going to leave my doors open. I'm going to have a good opinion of them. That's misplaced husn al-dhan. No, you assume that someone could potentially steal your wallet, so you take cautions and you lock your door. Now, do you assume that that person that just walked by, oh, that person's a thief? Maybe that person's a thief. That's not what it means by having su'al dhan here. It means that you go off of the basis of something could potentially happen. And the same thing goes, is that it's sunnah to write loans down, even for your closest friend, with two witnesses. And so it's my close friend, don't worry. No, the sunnah is that you write that down. And you have two witnesses, that so-and-so loaned money from me. And you don't assume that they're going to pay it back. And it's your close friends, so they probably are going to. But you assume that something could potentially happen. You don't assume that this person is a bad person. He wouldn't be your close friend if he was a bad person. So you see the difference? So when it comes to mu'amalat, there's a way that we're supposed to deal with things. So there are certain visible signs whereby which that, if someone walked into the room with a very different hairstyle, in clothes that we know in this culture are associated with a particular type of the subculture, and they walked a certain way and spoke a certain way, those are signs. Now, when it comes to the realm of da'wah, anyone who walks through the door, ahlan wa sahlan, right? Whether it is a spy from the FBI or that anyone else, and even people that would want to come here and harm us, and may Allah protect us and preserve us, hopefully they would have that life-changing experience the moment they walked in the door and be granted hidayah. This is our job, is to help people. And obviously if we have to defend ourselves, we defend ourselves. But my point being is that these spaces, these sacred spaces, we want them to be means for people that don't have faith to come to faith. And people that are at very different levels of practice in their faith increase wherever they're at, move up in one of the stations of the religion. That's when we talk about from the imperative of da'wah. But when we're talking about dealings, is that on one hand, yes, I am required to help every single person wherever they're at to get to a better state. But when it comes to dealings, you might deal with a particular person from the standpoint of da'wah in one way, but you might not necessarily loan that person money. You might not necessarily let that type of person borrow your car, right? There could be, but they can't be unfounded. And this is where that there are that a lot of biases within the community. This is not opening up the door for bias. And there's a fine line between one of these things that are mentioned here and between that cultural biases whereby which that people mistreat other people. This is not what he's talking about at all. And we have to be very clear about that. But there are certain signs that indicate certain things. And when someone enters into a situation where there's things that they don't know, is that we're required to be to be cautious and to be balanced in relation to that caution. So the first type of person is someone who, unknown. You don't know this person. So let's just say that you're traveling and you're driving through Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and you just stop and that another Muslim sees you and they invite you to your house. Oh, you're traveling, you're going to Chicago? Why don't you come over for lunch? They invite you over for lunch. And there's no outward sign of that they're unknown to you. And there's no outward sign to indicate corruption or injustice. Then that has a particular hukum or legal ruling in how we interact with those people. So he says, the legal ruling on such circumstances is that if an unknown person offers you food or presents you with a gift, so someone just comes up out of nowhere, someone you don't know at the retreat or somewhere else, and just gives you a gift. Or if you wish to purchase something from his shop, you need not question him. Rather, the fact of his having possession in addition to his being a Muslim are sufficient to enable you to quietly accept what he offers. And you don't have to pry into it and do all the things that people might do. And then Imam Al-Ghazali wants to preempt someone's question. So he says, now you may object that corruption and injustice have overcome nearly everyone these days. Because that would be no more than unfounded suspicion about a particular Muslim, and certainly some kinds of suspicion are sinful. This Muslim then deserves by virtue of his Islam that you not have misgivings about him, waswasa. If you were to think ill of him simply on the basis of what you'd seen in others, then you would have wronged him and sinned at the same time for being critical of him when there was no basis for doubt. In such a case, were you to take possession of something he offered, its being unlawful would be a matter of doubt. So the point here is that if someone's majhul, and Imam Hussain makes this very subtle distinction. He says that most of the fuqaha don't know the difference between something majhul and that's something that is mashkuk. And that something is doubt, you actually have, there's two sides of it. It could go this way, it could go, it's just unknown. And so someone that's just unknown, someone gives you a gift, invites you to your home, you accept from them, khalas. And it's actually in this case that not required to ask them a question. And in fact, doing so is problematic. And he says, by way of evidence for the above, we know that the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, used to stay the night in different villages while at war and on journeys, and never did they refuse the hospitality offered them. Likewise, they went into cities and into the marketplaces, even though the unlawful certainly existed in their times. Not a single question is recorded from them except in cases where there was doubt. So then he mentions the state of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, that when he had given him something to eat, that he started to have doubt about that food, and then it turns out that there was a doubtful matter. The likewise of Sayyidina Umar, when someone had given him milk, camel's milk, and gifted it to him, and the milk tasted different, so he wasn't what he was accustomed to, and then asked, and then ascertained that this was not milk that he should be drinking. He said, anyone who is taken in as a guest by someone they do not know will not be doing wrong if they accept without questioning. If one should then notice that the home of the host is lavishly decorated and obviously expensive, one may not say something to the effect that lawful money is hard to come by, and this house must have cost a great deal. So how did you manage to accumulate so much lawful money? You can't do that. And Imam Ghazali then preempts our objection. If you were to object, maybe the host would not mind being asked. I would reply, maybe he would. Furthermore, the reason you ask is so that you do not want in uncertainty, but when you say maybe, then maybe the host's wealth is lawful. You're going to talk about maybes. Maybe the host's wealth is lawful. Likewise, the sin in one's giving offense to a Muslim is no less abhorrent than one's consuming the dubious or even the unlawful. Indeed, most people are offended by questioning of this nature. Moreover, it is not permitted that a great question another concern. It is not permitted that a guest question another concerning his host, even if the other person might know something, as that is even more offensive. So that you can't ask the host, nor can you even ask someone else that knows the host. That could be even more offensive. Why? Because you're bringing someone else into the matter now. If the guest questions another about his host and the other knows nothing about the host, then the guest is guilty of harboring sinful suspicions. What is more, such a course entails both spying and casting aspersions on one another, even if not overtly. All of this is clearly prohibited in a single verse in the Quran. Allah says, O you who have faith, avoid most suspicion, for some suspicion is a sin. Do not spy on one another, nor speak ill of one another. And then that has a critique here of what he calls the ignorant Sufis, the people of the spiritual path who lack knowledge. Yet how many ignorant Sufis will offend others by questioning them and by speaking with them in a harsh and insensitive manner? Indeed, it is most pleasing to Shaitan that they should seek to bring fame to themselves for their circumspection, their caution in consuming only what is lawful. A lot of times people have ulterior motives in this. If their concern was truly for Islam, their fear of causing discomfort to the heart of a Muslim would be much greater than their fear that something unknown should enter the stomachs of those who are in fact not responsible for the unknown, if there is nothing to indicate that it is to be avoided. Know then that the way of wara', of scrupulousness, is by avoiding rather than questioning here. So someone might think, no, I just got to question. No, there's times where wara' dictates is that you actually don't have wara' and questioning. Wara' dictates here is that you that don't question, rather that you go what wara' lies in eating and in thinking well of another Muslim. So this is the first category. And again, all of this relates to someone who is majhul, is not known. Is that then the second kind of circumstance has a different ruling. Is that this is someone that there's some type of ambiguity owing to evidence that gives rise to doubt. Okay, so notice he chooses his words very carefully. So there's a sabab, bisababi dalalatin, that this is due to, there's a dalada, there's evidence, there's an indication that leads to doubt. And then he goes and he talks about physical characteristics, clothing, words and deeds, And so that there's certain indicators in terms of the way someone keeps himself, the way that someone dresses, how someone speaks, the various things that we do. And again, these are not cultural, let alone racist biases. This is not what we're talking about here. But we're talking about things that directly relate to the sacred law. And I'm intentionally not mentioning his example because they are likely not to apply in our particular context. But there are definitely examples when you see someone that, okay, this is an area of caution. And when someone sees that, it has a different legal ruling. So what does one do here? Then if one intended to purchase something from such a person, or accept a gift from him, or to accept his invitation for food, and the person was a stranger unknown except for the signs mentioned above. And this is what's so beautiful about the early books of fiqh, and this is why some of the later scholars used to prefer the earlier books of fiqh. And they actually used to prefer the fact that they didn't make tarjih, where they said that this is the dominant opinion, and they would leave both opinions out there. And even though that it was important for the later scholars to do that, the problem is that some people, if you don't take from balanced scholars, will make it seem as the opinion that they say is the dominant opinion, as if it's the only opinion and that there's nothing else in the books of fiqh, and that is not correct. And this is very, very important. And there are many people that become that very strict within their own school, and almost as if they completely deny that there are other opinions within the school, let alone within the other schools. And that is, if someone wants to impose that conservative on their own selves, that is fine, if that is according to their degree of scrupulous and where they're at in their deen, in a balanced fashion, and is something that they can really do. However, to impose that upon everybody else is not only wrong, but it's extremely harmful. It's very harmful. And there is a dua of our Prophet ﷺ, and I think I was meaning to quote that. And one of the great scholars of Hadramaut, Habib Ahmed, excuse me, bin Hassan al-Tas, is that he mentions this dua of the Prophet ﷺ in the beginning of his book, and that the dua states, Allahumma man shaqqa ala ummi fashquki lahumma alayh, that, oh Allah, whoever imposes difficulty upon my ummah, then, oh Allah, impose difficulty upon him. Allahumma man rafiqa bi ummati, that farfaqi lahumma bih, and that whoever shows mercy and gentleness to my ummah, then show gentleness and mercy to him. And that one of the ways that people do that is lacking wisdom in giving fatwa and in helping people understand and apply the sacred law in their lives. And there's a difference between issuing a legal fatwa and between hikayat al-aqwal, and telling people what is that a possible range of valid opinions, and then letting them find what works best for them. And so these are nuances that relate to people that are in that answering people's questions and so forth. But it's very important to indicate this reality. And so, Allahumma salli sallim alayhi wa ala alih. Where were we? So he's saying that there's two possibilities. We went on a tangent there. And he's going to say what he feels is the stronger possibility. But the fact that he mentions both is important. And this is really important. And it's very easy. And there's a beautiful statement that it's mentioned by the Salaf, but Imam Ibn Waq mentions that in the book we quoted. He says that a-rukhsa, that ad-deen, akhdu rukhsatan and thiqa. This deen is that taking a dispensation, an opinion that suits you amongst a variety of other positions, that from a trustworthy scholar. أما التشديد فيحسنه كل الناس. As for being hard upon people, everybody can do that. It's very easy to see the world in binaries. It's very easy to see the world in a black and white type way. That's easy. And this is one of the ways that people are radicalized is that to create these black and white that ways of looking at things, and it seems so simple. And then people just jump on these bandwagons. And it's like, you're telling me Imam Shafi and Imam Abu Hanifa, and I'm telling you the Kitab and the Sunnah, right? No, I'm telling you, I don't want your understanding of the Kitab and the Sunnah. I want the understanding of Imam Shafi of the Kitab and the Sunnah, not yours. That's based upon your hawa, right? Dafu yani. But you'd be surprised, these very simple statements have led how many people astray? And then in a number of other ways as well, especially in the political sphere. So we have to have balance in our deen. So what does he say is that this indicates there's two possibilities here. That then it is possible to say that the fact of possession indicates ownership, while these signs and indicators are essentially weak evidence. So even though you see some of these outward signs, he's saying it's possible that shar'an, in the sacred law, to say is that because you know that this is his wealth, or at least it's that there's nothing to indicate that it's not, these things might be weak evidence, and that therefore one may proceed with what one intends. Nonetheless, to avoid so would clearly be more prudent than course of action, but there's a degree of permissibility. He says, though, then, likewise, however, it is possible to say that the fact of possession is essentially weak evidence. Furthermore, it is countered by the kind of indications that give rise to doubt because of the way that this person that looks outwardly. This is the argument that I prefer, and the ruling is the one that I give as a fatwa, as it complies with what the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, reject what gives rise to doubt in favor of what leaves you free of doubt. The implicit sense of the text of this tradition is the imperative, right? Da, right? Leave that what makes you doubt. Though it admits as well of merely recommending. So this is a discussion in usul al-fiqh, in Islamic legal theory, as that every time that there is a command, does it mean that when there's a command that necessarily that thing is an obligation? So the classic example that they'll mention, as we mentioned this yesterday, when Allah says in the Quran, kulu washrabu, eat and drink. This is a command. It is a command. And on one hand, yes, it is haram to starve yourself unnecessarily. But in general, the scholars interpret this command to be for jawaz, for permissibility. And this gets into understanding this nusus. And this is why it actually is a really good idea in our time for people to take a usul 101 type class to learn the basics of Islamic legal theory, because you start to realize the degree of sophistication in this whole matter and how amazing it is that the scholars of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah developed a comprehensive, systematic, and coherent system for interpreting the nusus of the Quran and the ahadith of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is unparalleled in human history, and it is amazing. And all of the various differences in the great mujtahid imams who took part in this amazing tradition that ultimately that are part and parcel of what it means for the Prophet ﷺ to be a universal prophet. That this religion is for everybody in every time, in every geographical location. And when you see the splendor of this tradition and the amazing nature of these principles, especially when you get deeper and you study qawa'id al-fiqhiyah, the principles of fiqh, and you get into and then discussions of the Al-Maqasid of the Sharia, the overarching objectives of the sacred law, and you start to study Islam, how these scholars did this. It's really fascinating, and it's incredibly beautiful, so that there's not any instance that except that it's going to have a legal judgment. And then again, it gets back to the same point we've been making in almost every session. You want to begin your religious practice with doing what you absolutely know you have to do and staying away from what you absolutely know what you have to stay away from. And then as you get into these details, is that you slowly and carefully, that with the guidance of learned people who know your context, help you become more and more and more and more scrupulous. And that there's an outward dimension to it, but the inward dimension is even more important than the outward dimension. The outward dimension is important. But there are people that open up this door for scrupulousness that is solely the outward dimension. And that could also be very harmful. And then there's people who open up the door for that to be imposed upon other people, which could be even more harmful. But the inner dimensions of this scrupulousness is even more important than the outward. But even then, we have to move carefully. And that if we try to do too much too quickly, it's not going to last. Because this is the nature of the nafs. Is that the nafs you cannot defeat in one blow. Shaitan you can. Indicated shaitani kana da'ifa. You can learn his plots, cease to follow his whisperings and insinuations, and then you're protected. But the greatest spy of shaitan is your own nafs. Overcoming your nafs, because it is you, cannot be done usually, except by way of saintly miracle, overnight. It's done over a long, long, long period of time. And this is what we need, an understanding of this deen that is that sophisticated enough and that practical enough that helps us navigate every stage of our life. When we're young, when we're in elementary school, middle school, high school, then when things change and we go to college and the new things that we face, then we enter into relationships and get married. We enter into the work world, and then we start to get older, and then our parents get older, and then we all of a sudden start to have children. And then having children is very different than just being married. And then having teenage children is a whole other type of thing. And there's a lot of people that are very strict, but just try to be very strict with teenage children in the United States of America. And we'll see how long that it is practical for you to have your misplaced that water in relation to what you impose upon other people. Just try it. Don't try it. I'm saying that like in the sense of, don't try it. Because you're likely to lose your children. You're likely to lose your children if you're not balanced. And if you're not understanding. And you're not willing to, that I won't go as far to legitimize something like fiqh al-waqa and say that anything goes because this is the situation. But you're not dealing usually with situations that are good or what's better. You need the wisdom of dealing with situations when no two outcomes are actually terribly good. And that's where you're at. And if you force something on them in this moment, you might lose them completely. So how do you navigate that territory? That's very hard for people, especially those that have high standards, especially those who want great things from their kids, or have seen sacred that spaces in sacred cities where is that people achieve amazing things in short periods of time because of the nature of that society. And these are very big. This is why we need to take from the right people that can help us navigate all of these issues. And anyhow, so this is what he says here. And he says these are the two possibilities there, that it requires a little bit more that we look into it further. And then he goes into a further discussion about the difference of the various types of indicators. And there's even other layers of indicators. And one of the things that he mentions here is that if, on the other hand, one were to witness a person cursing another in anger, right, is that he would consider this to be a weak indicator. Because even good people, when they're angry, might do something that they shouldn't be doing. So that would be a weak indicator as opposed to something else that what might be a stronger indicator. So then at this point, we're utterly confused. So what do we do? So he says, and now we're not utterly confused, but what I'm saying is these things get very detailed, is that thus the ruling in all such cases is with the way the heart inclines. Ultimately, the matter is between the individual and Allah. Ultimately, the matter is between the individual and Allah. And this is something very important. I hope we'll come back to this. Is that in the end, you have to do your best. In the end, you have to do your best. And doing your best means you learn as much as you can about your deen. And certainly there are things that you won't be taken into account for that you didn't know. But then there will be things that because you neglected learning, you might be taken into account for. طلب العلم فريضة على كل Muslim. Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. So we have to learn regularly. This is essential. And we have to connect to people of knowledge. This is essential. And then we have to do our best in a balanced fashion to progress over an extended period of time. And there are other hadith, like the hadith of the army that is swallowed up by the earth, bil-bayda, and that, and the Prophet ﷺ said, "Yukhsaf bi awwalihim wa akhirihim." All of them will be swallowed up. And then they asked the Prophet ﷺ, I believe it was Sayyidah Aisha, is that why that when that there was people that had nothing to do with the oppression of this particular army, and that the Prophet ﷺ said, the first of them and the last of them will be swallowed up. لكن تبعث يبعث على نياتهم. Then they will be raised according to their intentions. Or كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. In other words, is that not everybody's the same. Is that in the end, what was someone's intention in going to a particular place? One person's place is going to harm other people. Other people are just with that caravan or with those people. There's two very different intentions. And so in matters where things become very unclear, the most important thing, even if you get it wrong, is to be right with you and Allah. Is it not to do it for the sake of your nafs or for the sake of something that you know you shouldn't be doing something for? And there will be times where we have to make decisions on certain things. And we don't have the ability to research it in great detail. We hope that we've done the best that we can to give us guidance in that particular situation. But there might be certain situations where you have to respond right away. In those situations, you need to just check yourself. And Ya Rab, I don't know, but this is the best that I can do, and this is my intention. And then the hope is from the bounty of Allah, is that even if we got it wrong, that it's not one of those things that we're going to be taken account for something that we should have learned, and Allah Ta'ala will forgive us and we raise according to our intentions. Right? This does not mean that a good intention can make something that is known to be unlawful permissible. No, that's not what it means. That no matter how much water that you throw in a pool of urine, it's not going to, well, actually in the Shafi school, if it became kullatain and there was no change, bad example. Yani, there's certain things you can't make pure, right, intrinsically, right? And there are things that are that definitely haram, you can't make them permissible, okay? And obviously this is other than the times of like carrion and necessity and things of that nature. Anyhow, so then the third kind of circumstance is when a person's state is known by means of experience and exposure, on the basis of which an assessment may be made as to whether the person's wealth is from lawful or unlawful sources. For example, one might know of someone's apparent piety, religiosity, and integrity, while admitting that the person's inner state might be quite otherwise. We don't know people's inner states. In such a case, it is not necessary to question the person, nor is it permitted. As in the case of the unknown, the person that's majhul, it is best simply to proceed with the matter. In fact, to proceed in such a case is less dubious than to go through with eating the food of an unknown, because that is far from prudent, though certainly not unlawful. Partaking of the food offered by people of piety, however, is the way of the prophets, peace be upon them all, and the saintly. And he quoted a hadith of the Prophet says, eat not except the food of the people of taqwa, and feed not your food except those who of people of taqwa. If, on the other hand, one were to know from personal experience that another is and he mentions different types of classifications of people that were known not to be upright, and was thus in no need of further evidence as to appearance and clothing, then in that case it is essential that one question the person as in cases where there is doubt. Rather, there is all the more reason that one should do so. So if we take this back to the thing that he began with, is that that it really gets back to this principle of, as he says, the unequivocal teaching is questioning is required when doubt occurs, let alone when someone has certainty or there's a high degree of probability. Those are very different circumstances. So then he talks about the second reason, which is doubt caused by the thing itself, that property, that possession, rather than one who owns it. And so here he says, this happens when the lawful is intermixed with the unlawful. For example, when bundles of a certain produce are put up for sale in the marketplace and bought by the merchants there. Under such circumstances, it will not be necessary for buyers in that town or in that marketplace to question the merchants about everything that the buyers buy from them, unless it were to become evident that the majority of the goods in their possession were from unlawful sources. Then it will be necessary to ask. If the majority of the goods and wares are not unlawful, that it will be prudent to investigate but not necessary. The proof that inquiry and scrutiny are unnecessary when the majority of goods are not unlawful is the companions, may Allah be pleased with them, never refused to buy goods in the markets even though dirhams entered in usurious transactions were in circulation there, and illegal plunder and the like. Nor did they question every transaction. Rather, questions were asked rarely and only when there was doubt concerning a particular person. So that's very, very helpful. And then he brings up something here about what of a person whose wealth becomes, he has all these questions that he brings up. What of a person whose wealth becomes mixed with the unlawful? And then he gives examples. He says, if the greater portion of such person's wealth is unlawful, it is not permissible to accept his hospitality or gifts or charity without investigating. If it then appears that what is offered has come from the lawful portion of his wealth, then that may be accepted. Should it appear otherwise, however, it must be rejected or refused. Furthermore, if the lesser part of his wealth, then he goes into another topic. Okay, so that's the general principle there, is that if we know that someone has the majority of someone's wealth, and this is something that's known, this is not someone that is unknown, and again, with all of those same principles that preceded, then we have to look into that in a little bit more detail. And if someone has 75% of their wealth as a job that they have, it's an unlawful form of earning. Not something that's doubtful, something that's unlawful. There's a difference, there's a big difference between the two. Then someone has to inquire. And if it turns out that they have another lawful source, that 25%, and that it could be from that, it's permissible to accept that item, but this is where scrupulousness would be a good thing. But also carefully placed, and that considering that other things. And this is where we're going to mention a couple other things that about on the same point of asking questions, is that he has another that legal issue that he brings up, a masala. When inquiry is only a matter of scrupulousness, one may not question someone who donates food or money if one thinks the donor will be offended. Okay, so that we said that if the majority of the wealth is haram, then we need to look into it. But if the majority of the wealth that is halal, then it's just a matter of scrupulousness. So inquiry, like looking into it, is only a matter of scrupulousness. So this is another layer. When it's properly placed, one may not question someone who donates food or money if one thinks the donor or the person giving it to them will be offended. Rather, questioning only becomes necessary when it is clear that the greater portion of their wealth is unlawful. In that case, one should not care whether the donor will be offended or not. That's something one has to look into because of their state or because of what they know about their wealth. And then he brings up that another legal issue closely related to this. He quotes Al-Harith al-Muhasibi radiallahu anhu. He said, if one has a friend or a brother who will not be offended by one's questioning, it will be prudent not to question that person. This is because the person might reveal something that is better hidden, and one's questioning will lead to its exposure, which in turn may well lead to enmity. The point he makes here, now this is Imam Al-Ghazali commenting on this, is a good one, because if questioning is undertaken by way of prudence, by scrupulousness, not by way of necessity, then prudence in regard to such a matter would be to avoid exposing what he has hidden. Indeed, it will be more important to avoid bringing about enmity. He further stated, if one is assailed by doubt, one should still not question a person, supposing him only to be offering what is lawful. If one's heart is not satisfied, one should gracefully abstain without attempting to expose by means of one's questioning. And so again, that all of this is in regard to doubt, not certainty. He said such subtleties always must be kept in mind. So that's what he says here about asking. I hope that is fairly clear. It does get a little bit detailed. And then he has a section here on that extricating the repentant from financial iniquity. And that this is where he will talk about how it is that we get rid of wealth that we know is haram. So I remember experiencing this where I didn't know about it, but my grandmother had bought a bond for me. And she bought it for all the grandchildren. And it was a $5,000 bond, and the way these things work is that pay $2,500, and then it matures in 11 years. And then if you cash it in, you get $5,000 after 11 years. I don't know if it's still the same way or not. But the longer that you don't claim it, the more interest it accrues. So I think that in the end, it was somewhere when I cashed it in, was somewhere around $5,500. And I remember asking two of my teachers. I asked my Mauritanian teachers about that. And this is a classic example where we then have a choice. And the response that they gave to me is they said that non-Muslims, because my grandmother was not Muslim, are not mukhatab al-furu'. They're not required to implement the details of the sacred law, including interest. He said, you're a student of knowledge. He said, take the money and use it. That's, I don't deny it being a valid opinion. These are people of ilm. This is the son of Marabat al-Hajj, who knows that his fiqh. When I asked my teacher, Sayyidi Habib Omar, about that, is that he said, keep the principle, and then he said that give the rest in charity. And then I asked him, I said, can I give it to Dr. Mustafa? He said, no. He said, give it away in some way that's going to benefit Muslims, the Masalih al-Muslimin. And that set so much better with me. And yes, you're giving away what could potentially be $3,000. That's a lot of money. But in the end, do you really want to keep money that could potentially be tainted? Right? I'm not claiming that I'm a person of wara'. I'm the least people that have wara'. But my point is that we have to be willing to give up certain things. And that requires certain traits of the heart. And so then that, in this case, is very simple. You cash the bond and you keep the money. And then after that, you give that money away either to that projects that will benefit all Muslims if possible, or those who are in extreme need. Those who are in extreme need. And this is the way that you would purify that wealth of that. And then you'll hear other people, there are some people who will say, and I've heard that rightly guided scholars say this, is that if that you can take interest from a savings account, you should, and then you should give that money away to the needy. Things like that, I would never condone. I could never tell someone to do that. It's much safer, and I would always tell people to do, is that get an interest-free checking account if you absolutely have to have your money in the bank, which living here, it's almost impossible to live without having a bank account, right? So I would never advise that, even though there might be rightly guided scholars who do encourage that for one reason or another. Things of this nature, this would just be, but you're going to find difference of opinion on many of these things. And that those differences don't mean that this scholar is a good scholar and this scholar is a bad scholar. No, there could be rightly guided scholars who have differences that get back to their own differences in their methodology and approach to religion, right? And that many of these matters that are like this, and then this is where we have to really do what we feel comfortable doing, given that it's a rightly guided scholar who is giving us that particular opinion. So those are just a couple details there. So we'll just go over this pretty briefly. What time do we have until? 12:45? Is that right? La ilaha illallah. Wow. Okay. So he says, know that one who repents while in possession of intermixed wealth, intermixed with both halal and haram, must perform one exercise to segregate what is lawful and to extract it, and another exercise to dispose of what has been set aside. It will therefore be necessary to consider these two exercises. The first is segregating and extracting what is unlawful. And so there's a lot of details there. I'm actually in this, for time, I'm going to have to point you to, well, I'll just read it and hope it doesn't confuse you. Actually, maybe I won't read it. We can set up an afternoon class with Ustad Yusuf on this one. So I think we're going to keep it at that. Is that he goes into detail about that wealth that we have that we know is intermixed. And if it's a matter of just separating it very easily, we know this percentage is the haram, this percentage is halal. You separate it, and then you give that the wealth that was haram in any way, whether it's haram in and of itself or haram from in some secondary way. You give it away to something that would benefit the Muslims. And that if there's any questions about that, you can just ask that local teachers that you take from how exactly to do that in your particular locale. And then if, for instance, that there's other ways of doing it, that if it was a business, for instance, that then generated profit. And then he talks about the details of, is that what do you do if there's doubt? How do you do this? So there's a lot of details in this, but we'll just suffice is that to say is that if someone has haram wealth, and not wealth that you have doubt about, so there's a difference between there being a doubt about it and between that it being that outright haram. And again, there's even more subtleties, just even that classification. But there's a difference in terms of how we deal with it. And that it's a really good idea if people have investments, and you'd be surprised that Muslims have a lot of money in the United States of America. And people tend to not be very scrupulous in terms of how they invest. And that if you have a haram investment, and that it's been that bringing you more money on top of all of that, okay, what do you do? What do you do if the money is already spent? All of these questions arise, and that we're required to the extent possible to repair. You know, the first step is knowledge. The second step is to get things right from this moment moving forward. And then you start repairing to the extent possible. And that you continue to be broken into, that repent for things of the past. So then this last bit is how we wanted to end this idea of the heart's fatwa. He has this very beautiful section where that talks about the state of one's heart, and how, just as he mentioned here, it is very important that we consider this dimension, the dimension of the heart. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala alihi. And so he says, oh, I have it here. I was like, where is it? Printed it out. There's a hadith of our Prophet ﷺ that says, Istafti qalbak. Seek a fatwa from your heart. When aftok, and even if they gave you a fatwa, even if they gave you a fatwa, even if they gave you a fatwa. This is narrated in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad. And then he said in another hadith, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-ithmu Hawazul qulub. And you also see the narration, hazaza tul qulub. And that sin is unsettling to the hearts, is one way you could translate that. Sin is unsettling to the heart. It doesn't feel right at the level of your heart. But what he's going to say here, in that we're not going to say categorically that it's solely for this type of very noble heart that is pure, as Imam Ghazali is going to mention. But what we will say is that there's a degree that everybody shares in this. And then the more and more that we travel the path to the hereafter, the more pure the heart becomes, and the more then that you can seek fatwas from your heart when you have a more balanced approach to the religion. And there could be extremes on either side, though, which aren't what the Prophet ﷺ was referring to. Because some will say is that this was something specific to this blessed noble heart of Wabisa, who was the companion that the Prophet ﷺ was speaking to. But you will find other scholars as well that say that it has a general application, that at least in certain situations for every person. But then the way you would reconcile between both those is, as was mentioned, the call should be to have a heart that becomes more and more pure. And hearts become more and more pure from their effects of doing righteous deeds and the light that comes. Every act of worship has a light that it brings to the heart that is different from the others. The light of prayer is strong. The light of fasting is strong. The light of dhikr is strong. And they're different lights that bring radiance to your heart. Different types of invocations all bring that different types of light to the heart. And the more acts of devotion that we do, the more that we struggle against our lower selves, the more that we tread the spiritual path, learn our religion, and strive to put it into practice, the more radiant our heart becomes. The greater the degree of taqwa is that we know that Allah Ta'ala will give the people of taqwa furqan, a criterion whereby which they can know what is right and what is wrong. And ultimately, right and wrong is what Allah says right and wrong is, but He's also given the fitrah, the natural disposition of the human being, an ability to, in general, know what is right and wrong. But then as we tread the spiritual path, He gives us an especially deep, spiritually intuitive type of knowing whether something is right or not. And again, the more and more we get in tune with our hearts, the more clear our istikharas become, the more clear that we'll be able to realize, is this something that we should be doing or something that we should not be doing? And then always remember what we mentioned yesterday too, about that even if the Sharia says it's permissible, imagine if one of your teachers would do it. Imagine them in your place. Would they do it? Would they embark upon that? And if then you start to question because of something very subtle in your heart, then you have to think very carefully, is this something that just pertains to me? Because certainly there might be things that we do that our teachers don't do. This is the nature of being different to them. But is that from among the things that are acceptable and good? Right? So I know, for instance, that our teachers that aren't necessarily exercising the way that we exercise, but they tend to eat very well, i.e. that they don't snack. I remember being on a plane with one of my teachers, and he handed me a whole bunch of candy that they gave him. He said, "Here, you take this. I don't eat this." And that was the time I was still eating that kind of stuff. I have a sweet tooth. No, it's just naturally sweet stuff. But there's certain things that they eat very well, and that they in general take care of themselves. They tend to walk quite a bit on their day-to-day. And that seems to be the type of that exercise that our Prophet did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yes, there was times that he swam. Yes, there was times that he would, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that do other activities. But in general, it was just living a life where you're active, which people say in terms of activity, the best type of activity is not to just go out and do 10,000 steps, but it's to walk regularly throughout the day and just to have a very active life, which was what modern people did. But in our context, I think exercise is very important. So that to me is a classic example of something, okay, you might not see your teachers do in the specific way that you do, but we should definitely encourage people to do that in our context. And there's a number of other things that are like that. So this is what he says here, is that he goes on to speak about that how sin is what is unsettling to the hearts. Trying to find this here. No. And he says, وَكُلُّ مَا حَاكَ فِي صَدْرِ مَرِيمِ حَنَسَ فَلَوْ أَقْدَمَ عَلِي مَا حَزَازَةِ الْقَلْبِ اسْتَضَرَّ بِهِ. And so the one taking the path to the hereafter, if they do something that is unsettling to their heart, again in a balanced way, is that it will harm them to the extent that it is unsettling to their heart. بل لو أقدم على حرام في علم الله تعالى وهو يظن أنه حلال لم يؤثر ذلك في قساوة قلبه. Imam Ghazali says. Rather, were that someone to do something that is actually haram, and the caveat there is that they weren't negligent in learning, thinking that it is permissible, that would not harm the hardness of their heart. So perhaps that's the answer that someone asked that question yesterday, if that in terms of the spiritual effects of food, is it like poison that you're going to, whether you know you're eating poison or not, it's going to harm you or not? Perhaps this is that the answer there. And then he says, وَلَوْ أَقْدَمَ عَلَى مَا هُوَ حَلَال فِي فَتْوَى عُلَمَاء الظَّاهِرِ وَلَكِنُّ يَجِدُ حَزَازَةٍ فِي قَلْبِهِ فَذَلِكَ يَضُرُّهُ. But if someone would do something that is permissible by the fatwa of scholars, but still it's unsettling to him, that actually would harm him. So he's talking about the murid, the aspirant, the one traveling a path to Allah Ta'ala. وإنما الذي ذكرناه في النهي عن المبالغة أردنا به أن القلب الصافي المعتدل. What type of heart is he referring to here though? The heart that is safi, pure, and معتدل, balanced. هو الذي لا يجد هزازة في مثل تلك الأمور. فإن مال قلب موسوسا عن الاعتدال ووجد هزازة فأقدم ما يجري في قلبه فذلك يضره. But if someone is imbalanced, that there's misplaced caution, it's not really a place of where what our scrupulousness really is. It comes from a lack of understanding of their religion. And it's closer to being whisperings of shaitan to get them to be too extreme. Because this is what shaitan does, is that if he can get you to leave Islam in any way, he will. If he can't, he's going to try to get you to do all different types of sin. If he can't get you to do all different types of sin, he's going to try to get you to postpone doing good. If he can't get you to postpone doing good, then he's going to try to get you to do too much. And if he can't get you to do too much, he's going to try to get you to be too extreme. And then if he can't get you to be too extreme, he's going to try to get you to do it for other people. And if he can't get you to do for other people, he's going to try to get you to be impressed with yourself for how it is that you worship. But that's the subtlest of that entire hierarchy, is it have ujub, to be impressed with yourself. And then if he can't get you to have ujub, there's certain tests that come the way of the great awliya and the salihin from shaitan. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and preserve us from him. Ya Allah. And so he said that if someone's heart is the heart of someone afflicted with misgivings from shaitan, and so it's not a balanced heart, he says that if this person that doesn't embark upon something or does embark upon something based upon those misgivings, that will harm him. And this is why he says that he starts to talk about his tashdid upon the people that have waswasa. But then he goes on to say, and that how rare that this heart is. وَمَا عَزْ مِثْلَ هَذَا الْقَلْبِ. And how rare that this heart is. And then he goes on to say, that pointing to this balance is that if we don't have these hearts in and of ourselves, and this is what he says, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَثَقْ بِقَلْبِ نَفْسِهِ, whoever cannot rely upon their own heart, فَلْيَلْتَمِسَ النُّورِ مِنْ قَلْبِ مَنْ بِهَذِهِ الصِّفَةِ. Then let him find a heart that has this description. And this is the Adam that is al-muwaffaq, al-muraqab li-diqaiq al-ahwal. So there obviously someone has a heart that is pure and is balanced, but they're a scholar, they're a person of knowledge who's been given tawfiq from Allah, and that knows very well the various states of the heart. We should seek these people out. And ultimately, what we should think, how we should think about this is, we should prepare what our answer is going to be on Yawm al-Qiyamah when we're asked about what we did. And that's one of the greatest things that we can take home. And if there's a matter that you just, I don't know exactly what I should do here, you do your best to learn, to ask, to consult, to think it through, come to your decision, make sure you're clear about your intention, and then, Ya Allah, if I'm asked about this, and it might be that a scholar you trust says, do such and thing, that you can say, Ya Rab, this scholar was the one that I believe to be the most knowledgeable and pious person that I've set up between me and you, meaning that to learn knowledge of what you want from him. So we all have people like this in our lives. And that those people that we have, we want to make sure that those are people we believe have a good standing with Allah. And so Yawm al-Qiyamah we say, Ya Rab, this is the person I trusted with my religion. And I asked them, and this is what I said, and I did what they said. And this is why it's such an enormous responsibility for someone to be in a position where they're giving people religious advice. This is why Imam Ghazali comes down so hard on the scholars, or that wannabe scholars, the evil scholars. That's why he comes down so hard upon them and lambasts them. Because this is one of the most dangerous things of all, when you have evil scholars that sell their religion for the things of this world, and that essentially call people to Allah with their tongues, but call them to the fire with their states. May Allah Ta'ala protect us and preserve us. And so this is what he says. It said, if you can't trust your own heart, then find that someone that has these traits that we mentioned and seek light from that heart. And then he quotes the Psalms of Dawood. And Allah Ta'ala, Awha ila Dawood, Allah revealed to David alayhi salam, say to Bani Israel, Inni la andur ila salatikum wa siyamikum, I'm not looking at your prayers or your fasting. وَلَكَنْ أَنْظُرَ مَنْ شَكَّ فِي شَيْءٍ فَتَرَكُهُ لِأَجْلِي, but I'm rather looking to see if anyone doubts something and then leaves it for my sake. فَذَلِكَ الَّذِي أَنْظُرُ إِلَيْهِ, that is the one that I'm going to gaze upon. وَأَيِّدُهُ بِنَصْرِي, and I will assist him with my victory. وَأُبَاهِي بِهِ مَلَائِكَتِي, and I will boast about that person to my angels. So this is what we want to attain. We want to attain hearts that are like this, and that when we start the path of implementing the halal and avoiding the haram, learning our religion, being around the right people, that progressing spiritually, more and more this will become clear. Our hearts will become more and more radiant. Inshallah ta'ala, inshallah, we will move up in the degrees of closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we should never ever despair, and nor should we ever think that it's not possible for us to reach the highest degrees of closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in this time. That we have to be stubbornly optimistic when it comes to this. Is that Allah knows how difficult our time is. And I've heard from our teachers, and this is not me saying this, that there will be people in our time that of the 120 rows of paradise, they will be raised in the first row with the kibar of the Sahaba, with the great companions. I've heard them say that. And they wouldn't say that unless they were certain that that was possible, and that there was going to actually be people from this time. Imagine how beloved to Allah this is, to live in such a difficult time. But then too, that worship Him, that when so many people have turned away from Him, to believe in Him when so many people have disbelieved in Him, and to implement His sacred law when it's not even being imposed on us. How beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that? And then look at these blessed statements that our Prophet left us with, that the one who acts upon my sunnah and the fasada al-aminu bi sunnati and the fasad ummati lo ajr miyat shaheed, in one narration of Bayhaqi. Another narration, miyat shaheed. In one narration, whoever acts upon my sunnah, when my ummah has become corrupt, will have the reward in one narration, a shaheed, and another narration, 100 martyrs. And that then there's other narrations that indicate, other narrations about the greatness of that turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in times of difficulty, that al-abidu, that when our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, is that al-abidu and al-hajj kal-muhajir ilay, that the one who is in a state of worship when there's indiscriminate killing is like the one who is making that hijr unto me, and then giving life to his sunnah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the merit of that. And then what our Prophet said to the Prophet to the companions is that they would have the reward of that 50, that 50 from you, because you found people to help you and they don't find people to help them. So we can never ever despair. Our religion does not allow us to despair. On the contrary, is that there is abundant good. Our teachers continuously, they refuse to be pessimistic despite how difficult things are in the world, whether it's recent events or less recent events, whether it's in one particular geographical region or in many other places that Muslims are suffering, is that there's good coming to the ummah of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in the end, this is an ummah that is marhuma, that will receive the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. And this has to be our interpretive lens for all of the events that we see in the world. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us in all of our affairs. And the very best thing that we can do for not only our own selves, but for the ummah, is to rectify our own selves and to prevent the world from the evil that can come from our own nafs. That's the number one best thing that we can do. And then there's a long list of other things that we can do well within the realm of permissibility that will help every Muslim on the face of this earth. May Allah Ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us in all of our affairs, and to accept from us, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, and to give us a knowledge of the halal and the haram. Bless us to that always be where He has commanded us to be and never to be where He has forbidden us from being, subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah Ta'ala give us an intimate knowledge of the sacred law and move up in degrees of closest to Him, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, and to move up in the degrees of wara and taqwa and the stations of the religion, Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, and to devote our lives to Him and to spend our lives giving victory to Allah and His Messenger in serving this deen, learning sacred knowledge, putting it into practice and disseminating it, using our God-given abilities to help the ummah of our Prophet ﷺ and all of humanity. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.